Hi, Rob. Good morning.
How you doing, Andrew?
Very good. It's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining. Just to sort of set the stage for the audience, I'd just like to welcome you all to a special online speaker session entitled Lessons from a Startup Founder. Just trying to see what we can learn from startup founders. And I think it's going to be a great opportunity for the venture community, for the entrepreneurial community as well. My name is Andrew Maywa, and I'm an investment director with TDK Ventures. And in today's session, I will be interviewing Rob Devlin, the CEO and co-founder at Metalenz. Rob has an amazing story as a first-time startup founder, and I'd like to share this with you to help current and aspiring entrepreneurs. Today's conversation will cover Rob's personal journey, lessons that shaped him, and his vision for the future. These insights and lessons should be applicable to any entrepreneur. So with that, first, I'd like to quickly introduce Metalenz and TDK Ventures. Metalenz is a technology startup commercializing a revolutionary flat optical technology, which is transforming optical sensing in consumer electronics and automotive markets. TDK Ventures is an early stage technology-focused venture fund that invests globally in innovative technologies. TDK Ventures invested in Meadowlands, and we're actively engaged in partnering with them and collaborating them to help extend their vision. And so with that, I'd like to get us started. Thank you so much, Rob, for agreeing to do the interview. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your career?
Sure. So I finished my PhD at Harvard University back in 2017. So I worked there in the group of Federico Capasso, who was one of the co-founders at Meadowlands. And for me, I've always been interested in the intersection of materials engineering and electrical engineering and making devices. So in my PhD in the Capasso group, I focused on these optical materials called metasurfaces, which we ultimately ended up is a technology we spun Meadowlands out based on. So it was towards the end of my PhD where we had some really exciting results about performance and getting really high quality images from these metasurface optics. And that was ultimately when we decided to start a company as Meadowlands.
That's very exciting. And coming sort of out of grad school and then starting Meadowlands, I think it must have been an exciting experience. How did you feel as a first-time founder through that experience?
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer there is it was a real whirlwind for us. The founder, me and Federico as well, but certainly me as a first-time founder. The way that we came to start Meadowlands was somewhat organic in the sense that Federico and I hadn't been sitting around Federico and his other students hadn't been sitting around going, we really need to start a company. We really need to start a company. We had a paper that was on the cover of Science magazine in 2016. And as soon as that paper went out, which was the first demonstration of really high quality images from this new type of lens, a metasurface, we started getting inundated with requests from cell phone manufacturers, from camera manufacturers, from VCs, from entrepreneurs in the area. So it really was this sense of sort of just the timing happened to be perfect as we put this out. And it then made us say, okay, we really, now is the time to actually go out and see if we can take this technology that has had all this promise and make it into something real, make it into a product, make it into something commercial. So, it was really a whirlwind, I would say, just in the most honest characterization of it. And with that, of course, comes all of the ups and downs that you would expect as well, right? So there certainly was that initial sort of burst that we got in terms of attention from all of these companies, but then you have to go out and really work to get investors around your idea and to really sell your idea and your vision to a number of other people. And so, at times that's very, very difficult, especially when you're going out as a first-time founder. And not everyone will immediately get what it is that you're doing. So you have both the highs and the lows. So it really was, it was a roller coaster to start, for sure.
That's amazing. And yeah, you mentioned highs and lows. What were some of the notable either highs or lows that you may want to share?
Sure. So I would say in terms of the highs, it was, when you're doing a PhD, when you're doing research, of course your papers get some recognition and you get some citations, and that's always great as someone doing research. But I would say the biggest highs were when we would actually start engaging with companies, and in many cases some of the largest companies in the world in consumer electronics and the semiconductor space. And you were talking to folks at that company who have seen many different technologies throughout their career. It was seeing the legitimate excitement in terms of what we were doing as being something new and valuable. So always that sense of having, again, a group of people who have seen many high tech companies come and go, have seen in their own career sort of promise of technology and technology that doesn't always deliver, having that excitement really be reflected back to you by those people. That really was, I would say, some of the biggest highs. But of course, the reality is, again, not everyone will always fit well with what you're doing, or not everyone will always exactly buy into your vision. It's just the reality of it. In general, when you're going out and you're pitching, especially as a first time, the first time you're going out and pitching, as you're honing your message, as you're going along, there's going to be a lot of no's. That's just kind of the nature of raising money in general. And I think certainly when you're so bought into what it is that you're doing, even though there's often many times there's synergistic or lack thereof reasons that people don't necessarily invest, it always is a bit of a gut punch, so to speak, when someone says no. So yeah, those I say the highs and the lows that reflect that excitement reflected back, and then oftentimes when you just have to go through a bunch of no's to get to the right investors.
Very cool. Very cool. And so you talked a little bit about working with investors and pursuing investment. How would you say the COVID pandemic has affected that? I mean, are there cases where, what are views on fundraising in the era of COVID where you may not necessarily be able to meet face-to-face with investors?
It's a really interesting question, because I would actually characterize it, and I'll also get your opinion on this, because you and I, TDK, having invested in Metalenz, I've never met you or Nicola, who had been involved throughout the entire investment process. Never met in person, but I honestly, my view is it actually has helped to some extent, because I do think it's easier to reach a lot more investors and investors to reach a lot more people, because we've sort of been forced into this situation where we've had to go through video calls. And, when we were raising money in this last round, there were days where I had maybe 7 calls with investors in a single day. And that's just not feasible when you're going to every person, or you're going and meeting people person to person at their home facility. So, I actually think, I'm not trying to say that meeting in person isn't still valuable, but certainly I would say in terms of expanding your search, connecting with more investors, doing it more efficiently, I actually think that COVID has sort of forced us into this video conference way of working. And I actually think it's been a benefit in some sense to going out and raising money.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. And to add to your point, I feel like now video calls are more of the norm. And
Yeah.
so I think one is able to still connect on a deep level and really get an understanding of the various opportunities and how an investor and entrepreneur can work together to create value together. So for us, it actually really worked very smoothly. And I think being able to communicate with you and your team. It just went well. And so, yeah, certainly an amazing and exciting investment for us.
Yeah. And I think just one thing to add there is I do think if we looked at sort of going forward in post-COVID days, I certainly think that what still makes a lot of sense is in the early stages of scoping out, whether an investor, or from the investor's perspective, whether a company is a good fit, it really makes sense to stay in kind of the video format, so we can quickly go through things, quickly get to know each other, and then find out whether it makes sense to move forward. And then, sort of to the later stages, when things are getting more serious and both sides are starting to, drive to a conclusion, then it makes sense to put the additional time from both sides to go and actually meet in person and do these sort of site visits or however we end up doing it. So I think we can find a best of both worlds approach going forward, which would be great.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you on that. Now, let's talk a little bit about culture. What are your views on startup culture, and how do you see that with respect to Meadowlands?
So culture is obviously a really important thing at a startup, because you're very few people in the beginning, and the way that you set that culture and a very few number of individuals can really shift the culture as well. And so for me at Metalenz, I think one of the most important things has been to make sure that we set up a culture where people aren't afraid to be wrong, and people aren't afraid to bring up new ideas. And also people are okay bringing up, dissenting views. We're trying to solve hard problems. And when you're trying to solve hard problems, you can't have people who are afraid that if they do something wrong or have an idea that isn't quite fleshed out yet, they're going to hold on to it for longer. We just need to have those ideas flow freely. So I really think that in terms of culture, it's setting up an environment where people feel comfortable to speak what's on their mind, and people also feel comfortable that if they're wrong about something, it's not going to be, held against them in any way. We have to be wrong a number of times before we get something right. So it's really been setting up that open space for people to just share freely.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. I think having that open environment where folks feel free to share ideas, and it'll foster a lot of collaboration. And I think in the long run will definitely benefit the company.
Yeah.
So along with that, what are your views on hiring? What sorts of teammates do you look for bringing folks on board?
Right. So we're in the Boston area, right? So there's lots of really smart people in the Boston area between the universities we have here. You yourself from MIT, we have Harvard, we have BU, Northeastern. There's lots of great universities and lots of really, really smart people in the area. So we're in no shortage of really, really bright people to come and join us at Meadowlands. So when we hire, it really is about that fit and about how that person will impact the overall culture. Again, you certainly want people who are able to bring up dissenting views. You don't want just people who are going to agree with everything that you're doing. But you also want to make sure that that person knows how to bring up those views in a way that isn't just going to sort of rub everyone in the wrong way to some extent. So, it's always about looking as sort of the first pre-screening really comes down to that person's personality, and if they are able to sort of contribute to this culture of open sharing. We don't want people who are going to come and just shoot down other people's ideas. We don't want people who need to be the smartest person in the room. So it's sort of checking that ego first and making sure that they're really someone who will fit in with the team dynamic. And normally it's, again, with the number of really bright people we have in the greater Boston area, we can find someone who is smart and has this other aspect to their personality that really makes sure they're not dragging the whole team down in some way.
Totally agree with you. And could you share a little bit high level of some of the challenges that you face and how you addressed those challenges?
Sure. I would say for me, one of the biggest challenges, and maybe the biggest surprise coming out of a PhD was understanding just how long and how much goes into building a champion, a set of, or rather a full base of champions at these large organizations that we're interfacing with. So, our first target market is in consumer electronics. And so we're typically dealing with very large organizations that will be our customers or our partners. And, it's easy for people to see the value of what we were doing on paper and sort of in our presentations. And I maybe had a bit of a naive view to begin with, where I thought it was like, great, they'll see how important this is and how valuable it is, and then we'll just kick off the engagement from there, and it'll be sort of going full speed right away. I think that the biggest challenge to begin with was, of course, people get excited about your new technology, but no one has ever really been fired for just pushing forward incrementally what they're already doing. So you have to get this broad buy-in from, at all levels of the organizations, the engineers, the executives, the business side. And so I think one of the biggest challenges, we had faced in the beginning was just having the full team to engage on all those different levels, and then really build that base over time of people and champions that we needed in these organizations. So it is a really challenging aspect because, the continual sort of effort that goes into doing this, at times it can sort of wear on you, because you as a startup, you're like, okay, let's go, we're ready. But at a large organization, you have to sort of continually be selling your value prop to them. You have to sell the business case, and you have to do that over time, a time period that for startups is a longer time period than a lot of us would like. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges, really, is just building that base up and getting it to a critical mass.
Yeah, actually, I would like to say I've been very impressed in the way you've handled some of those challenges, the way you've persevered through various situations that could seem daunting. And I think that's just a testament to your character and just your tenacity as a startup founder. What are some sort of tidbits of advice that you may share with other first-time founders? What do you think you wish you would have heard, so way back when, before you launched Meadowlands?
Sure, that's a great question. I think, I think that the best advice that I had gotten, and I actually got it a little bit after maybe 2 years after we had founded Metalenz, and I certainly wish it had come earlier, is, when you're starting a company, there is, of course, a lot of pressure that goes along with being successful. I mean, ultimately, the investors are investing in the technology because they're excited about it. That's part of the reason TDK is investing, but the investors also want to see a return, right? So there's a lot of pressure in terms of making sure the company is successful and return on investment and getting something into market and all of that. There's a lot of pressure there. But the best advice I had gotten was really to just focus on the technology and focus on the things that you're passionate about. And the rest of these things will work as long as you're really pouring everything into the technology. If you're focusing on the ends, if you're focusing on just sort of raising the next round, or you're focusing on an acquisition or an IPO, sort of the longer term things that we all want to get to, it can really wear you down, because you're moving away from the things that drove you to start the company in the first place. You're moving away from, you're putting even more pressure on yourself. So to me, it's really about that advice to focus on what it is you're passionate about, focus on the technology, focus on the people around you, and sort of building your team. It helps to alleviate a lot of the pressure that goes along with starting a company or being at a startup, because that's the thing that got you here in the first place. That's what keeps you happy. And that pressure is always going to be there, but it really does, in my mind, when I had that advice to kind of stop looking too far ahead and just keep focusing on what it is that made you do this in the first place, it certainly alleviates a lot of that pressure and makes the day-to-day a lot easier.
Very cool. And could you share a little bit high level about your vision for Meadowlands?
Sure. So our first set of products are in the area of 3D sensing. And one of the beautiful things that metasurfaces give you is the ability to take really complex modules, complex cameras, and basically make them to a single optical element. So you're greatly reducing the complexity of these modules, but you're actually improving the performance. So this is generally, if you look at what Meadowlands can provide, if you look at a traditional technology, when you reduce complexity, you're normally trading off against performance, right? What Meadowlands gives you is the ability to reduce complexity while improving performance. So this is really quite unique. And this is what's driving us into market for our first set of applications. But I think the most exciting part about what Meadowlands offers with our technology is actually the ability to bring entirely new forms of sensing to mobile form factors and mobile price point. So our first market is a market that already exists in 3D sensing. It's a new market, so that they're still looking for disruption and new technologies, which is why we fit well as a first application. But to really make the most advantage out of what Meadowlands and Metasurfaces offer, it's to bring new forms of sensing. So things like bringing say spectroscopy or spectrometer to a mobile form factor and price point, or things like bringing polarization imaging. These all have really interesting and unique applications that have been locked out of the consumer space and really confined mainly to scientific labs and medical labs, just because of how large and expensive these optical modules are. I think there's something really powerful when you take a entirely new form of sensing or a new way that people can connect to the world around them, and then put it into something that everyone's carrying around in their pocket. So I think that's really what we see as the long-term vision of Meadowlands after our first set of products, is to build these new forms of sensing out and basically, even to some extent, just see what are the other applications that come up once every person in the world has one of these in their pocket.
Wonderful. And I am excited about those future applications. I do think it'll have a major impact on consumer electronics, as well as many other areas of our daily lives. And,
yeah, it's certainly exciting.
So I think we're running towards the end of our time here. And I'd like to ask, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
So I think one of the things maybe we didn't touch on exactly, but it was mentioned a little bit in terms of as we were going out and raising money. I certainly think that one of the most interesting things, especially about our interaction with TDK, for example, has been we're a hardware startup, right? And so in some sense, we're actually sort of a relatively, it's more and more unique for hardware startups to be out there, and it's harder and harder for hardware startups to get funding. Everyone's looking at apps and software and everything else. But I think one of the most interesting aspects for us has been seeing from the industrial VC side, the corporation VC side, how much there is still interest and how important those relationships with CVCs are as a hardware startup. And so, yeah, that's been one of the great things about working with TDK. And then, of course, we have a number of other CVCs. And then even just finding the right investor as a financial that is also interested in hardware. That's been a really unique experience for me. And I think it actually has reframed how I would think about fundraising as a hardware startup, as if we were to go out in a second company, for example, or the next time I go out, because those strategic relationships are even more important for a hardware startup. And then it also, the corporations like TDK can understand what it takes to actually, launch hardware into the market. So that partnership is especially important. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I do agree that it's a very important partnership. I think we as an organization at TDK have learned a lot from you in Meadowlands, and we see this as a valuable partnership. And you're right. I think that deep tech investment and hardware investment in general is not as sort of prominent as other types of software investment among VCs. So yeah, I
Yeah,
agree. I think this is a unique situation, but thankfully, I think this partnership, I'm excited about it, and I think we can add a lot of value together.
absolutely.
Very cool. Well, with that, I'll conclude our conversation. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciated that. I think everything that you shared has been very insightful, and I think can really help other entrepreneurs out there who are looking to launch their startups. And certainly looking forward to more conversations with you and looking at different ways where we can add value to the ecosystem. So
Absolutely.
to everybody in the audience, thank you for joining, and I hope this has been helpful, and looking forward to other conversations in the future.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Rob. Appreciate it too.